Hello, guys. David Vose here again. Oh, buddy, it's a beautiful day. Well, I just got a letter back from YouTube, and they said no, they're not going to let me be monetized, I guess, for the rest of eternity unless I delete my channel and start over, I guess. And of course, they won't tell you why, but I guess we all know why. They don't want the truth or anyone talking about their opinion of the truth. Let's put it that way. Out there on the air. So they try to intimidate me by saying, we'll give you money if you'll tell people what we want you to say. Well, I won't do that. So it's been many, many months now. I don't know when this started. Probably, I don't know, 6 months or 7, 8 months. I don't know how long it's been now. I haven't had any monetization. But the Lord will provide and we'll be fine. And we will continue, Lord willing, doing these videos as often as we can, pretty much every day here. Well, yesterday I did this video, but it was way long because the first 20 minutes of it was me talking about the debate. And, I wanted to talk about the debate, but I really wanted to share with you the information that I had in the last hour of the video. So I'm putting what I did yesterday, that last hour about, well, if you look on your screen, you'll see several constellations around Polaris. The Little Dipper there is the bear, and you see Cephas, the father, and you see the great Draco, and we're going to talk about that. So let's get started. These prophecies that we've been following in Daniel and Revelation, all of us for a couple thousand years, and we all think we understand it. Now, I don't know that Paul or Jesus explained in any detail what Daniel meant. John came along, wrote some visions down, some signs and symbols that are very similar to Daniel. I don't think he explained it to us. But 100 years later, there were people already trying to figure what any of this means. We don't have a lot of people trying to explain this in the first 100 years or 200 years. Because at that time, I think they did know what these things mean. Remember, Daniel was an astrologer, and he was looking at the stars, and it was the astrologers that couldn't interpret the dream, but Daniel could. He was competing with astrologers, and Daniel was the head of the Magi, which is a group of astrologers. That's what they were called. The Magi they're not like magicians, like today, sleight of hand. The Magi were priests, and they were astrologers. And the three Magi that came and gave gifts to Jesus when he was born, they saw in the stars, his star. And here's an example of how we're misunderstanding so much. We've been taught to think, well, it was a star that they saw, and they followed it, like it was hovering. Some say, oh, maybe it was a UFO. They weren't following a star. They were looking at astrological signs. And there was a sign in the heavens, meaning an astrological sign, that was turning in their various cycles to give a prognostication of the future, which is what astrology is. You can tell the future by looking at the stars. Now, I don't know why Christians have never figured this out, because they were told never to get involved in astrology. But here's their book that they all read. I think Christians read the book of Daniel and Revelation more than any other books of the Bible, other than the Gospels. And they're reading a book of astrology given by astrologers, and yet they don't believe in astrology, so they don't understand it. So they say, okay, Daniel says there's a lion, and then a bear, and then a ram, and then a he-goat, and then a ferocious beast with 10 horns and 7 heads. They don't want to know what the culture of that day thought about dragons with 10 horns and 7 heads. They don't even know about Tiamat. And those who have ever heard of it they're not linguistics. They don't understand. It's so far beyond them. They don't understand that time and matter literally comes from the word Tiamat. because mother matter has been the feminine from the beginning. There's a system. Astrology is the system we're under. And even in the Bible, everything, the language, the priests, all of them used astrology. Because Christians have divorced themselves from that knowledge, they have no idea what's going on here. Tiamat, I mean, you've got these great scholars like Sitchin and Babinkowski and all these Londonicans and stuff. And they're like, well, maybe this great dragon is some kind of a planet. Maybe it's Nibiru or some other ancient planet that we think might have been hidden in the verses, right? They're all talking about this dragon or something. Even the Old Testament says that Yahweh pierced the serpent, the twisted serpent, Leviathan, which is paralleled with this sea beast. Some think Leviathan might have been a crocodile, but some kind of a ferocious beast with huge teeth in the Nile. And the behemoth was a hippopotamus. It's very possible. But the word in Latin and Greek for dragon is Draco. And that word is a constellation. It's been that way for a long, long time. And it is around, it's a very long constellation that drags, its tail drags a third of the stars of heaven. And it's in the northern hemisphere trying to surround Polaris, the bear. And there is the bear that is, the tail of the bear is the North Star Polaris. And Daniel's talking about, I seen a bear that rose up on one side. Well, that's what would happen, because if you're standing in the northern hemisphere looking to Polaris, the astrological signs in the constellations of the zodiac go around above you in the sky, and they come up in, like the sun and the moon, they come up on in the east and they go down in the west. But if you look towards the North Star, in the direction of the north, you see the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. The Little Dipper is the bear. And the handle of the dipper is the bear's tail. And that's Polaris. And so Daniel's looking not at the astrological signs that come up every age or throughout the year, but he's looking at the North Star. And that was considered the throne. They were the immortal deities. The other deities lived for a while and died, lived and died, and lived and died, right? Orion went down into the Duat and into hell and came back up, because Orion is one of the constellations of the 12 houses that goes around and around. But the bear and Polaris and all of these in the Draco, they're not part of the 12. They're in the immortal sky. They never go down. Satan's been reigning, and will he ever be thrown out of heaven? Well, he does. There's one period of time. It takes thousands of years for this to happen, but eventually Draco goes around and his head begins to kind of dip down over the horizon like he's been conquered. Well, at that, you see the bear that looks like he's raised himself up on one side. And there's no doubt in my mind that Daniel is talking specifically about this. And so I'm going to share with you the interpretation of Daniel in a way that you've never heard it before. Does that mean that we were wrong all this time about the bear being Media Persia? Yes, I think so. I think we're wrong about that. But do I think that we're wrong that the ram with two horns is Media Persia? No, I think that's correct. But you see, if Media Persia is the ram, it cannot also be the bear. And virtually all Christian interpreters have said for a long, long time that the bear has to be Media Persia, based on the fact that thou, O king of Babylon, are the lion. Well, it doesn't say that. It says he's a man that is like an image, and the head of gold, and then it goes down through the breastplate of silver, and then the girdle of copper, and the legs of iron, and then the toes mixed with iron and clay. So it follows very closely in 4 different parts of the man, with the head of gold being Babylon. It follows these 4 beasts. And so they assume then the lion must be Babylon. Well, in a sense, but not necessarily. Because these astrological signs come up from the sea, as the Bible says. Because they come up on the horizon and go up overhead and go back down over the horizon again. Looks like they're coming up out of the sea and going back into the sea, back into the bottomless pit. But remember, Polaris never goes down. He never comes up and he never goes down. He's in the middle, right there in the north. And Draco takes thousands of years for him to ever really make much of a movement. And the bear lasts for thousands of years. He's always up there ruling, because he's one of the primary rulers over. This is why in the book of Revelation, you see that there is a beast and a dragon, both with 7 heads and 10 horns. But they're not the same beast. One's in the heavens and one's in the sea. They're mirroring each other. We know they're not the same entity. I mean, if this beast is Rome or something, like some people will say, then the dragon can't be Rome. Because it's the dragon that gave to the beast its power and its throne and great authority. The dragon is the original serpent. And we can go back, most of you don't, maybe not aware of this, but Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian is very clear that the first of the deities was Absu, or the abyss, Absu, and Tiamat, time and matter. And really, this is a symbol of something that has nothing to do with countries or kingdoms or humans. But they were powers, the powers of chaos. And when time and matter came in, it destroyed the chaos. And time and matter had children like Chronos, chronology, and Anu, which is annual, and Horus, horizon, and setting on the other opposite horizon. But Horus means the hours. And this entire thing is a sexagesimal system created by the Sumerians, which is the 10 horns, or the 10 numbers, and the 60 and the 666 system, the number of a man, which is Adam. And it's this world that we live in, and the deities that rule over us is these powers, these animalistic natures, mountains, heavens, the sea, time and matter. And then later on, the Greeks talk about love and kindness and mind and logos, and they eventually usurp the authority of chaos, logic. So this is all it's talking about. But yes, I do believe that Daniel applied the ram with 2 horns. He says so we wouldn't believe it if he didn't say it. But he says that the ram is Media Persia. One horn came up after the other. First there was Media, then there was Persia. And that he saw coming a he-goat to charge the ram. Well, everybody in ancient times knew the he-goat was Capricorn. In fact, the word Capricorn means the he-goat. And if you'll notice, the word horn is in there. Capricorn is the word horn is actually in there. So it's the horned goat. Now, there's no coincidence that Daniel, when he says the ram is Media Persia, the goat means Greece, that he's not speaking in some analogy that at that time they were fulfilling on earth, they were manifesting what was being displayed in the heavens. But one of the problems of our interpreters today is that they don't know anything about these ages and how long they are. And I will read you something here in a minute because this is where we're getting all of this, and we're completely divorced from all of this knowledge. We do not know, but the yuga was 360 years, and that was a divine year. And so, because we have a clock that goes around every 12 hours, and we have a calendar that goes around every 12 months, that's not the last of the cycles. Then we have a divine year, which is 360 years. Most Christians, though, when they're trying to deal with this and they don't even know about astrology, they'll skip right out to a long cycle that they don't understand. They're talking about 1,260 days and 7 times. That is intertwined in what we're talking about. It's a very complicated to explain it here without charts and stuff, but I'm going to try. Since we have 360 days in a year, then if you win a day for a year, all you're doing is using the system of the yugas. So they say 7 years is 2,520 years, and when Daniel was talking, we'll have 7 these symbolic ages of 2,520 years. Well, that's actually correct, but they have no idea why. And not knowing why, they don't realize it's based on this divine year, or 360 years. And so the cycle's not 2,500 years. You've probably heard that the cycle's actually 25,000 years. And of course, there's a lot of discrepancies, because today the scientists say that it's not 360 days, you fool. It's 365, and so there it's all off. Well, they don't understand that's the way it's supposed to be. We have an intercalary month, which is part of the system. We don't always come back around the same spot. We're spiraling and we're growing and advancing. And it's all calculated within that 360-degree wheel. We talked about the 7 days of the week, the 52 weeks in a year. And 7 is cyclical. And so that's time. And when you add time and space, it warps it. But we'll get into that, down the road here. First, we got to get back to this 360 degrees. That is not just 1 year, but there's another 360-degree cycle that's 360 years. And Christians have no idea about that one. And so when you say, I see a lion, you might not necessarily be talking about 12,000 years ago, because there is an astrological cycle that lasts 25,200 years, actually. But that's not the cycle we're talking about. It's in there because as above, so below. As you get to the 7th seal, it opens up 7 trumpets or something. And at the 7th trumpet, there's 7 plagues. And at the 7th plague, it goes on and on and on, because it's cyclical until the 50th or the Jubilee, when we all go back to restoration. So when we get to spring, we don't come back around to the same place, but ever so often we adjust and we move on to a different month that is not even in this astrological wheel. What month is that? The 13th month. Does that have an animal too? In the Hebrew, it's Adar and Adar too. But they did that differently in different times. The Greeks say it's Asclepius, which is a story in the Greek mythology, which is not mythology, it's astrology. It's in the astrological wheel that this deity, on his birthday, got to have any wish he wanted, and he wanted to ride the chariot of Helios, his father, Helios, the sun. And Helios didn't want to do it, but he'd promised him. So he let him drive the chariot, and he fell asleep or was negligent and dropped the reins, and the horses started going down to the earth, and they hit the Sahara and made a big desert. Now, what do we do with that today? Today, we might start stories like Sitchin and these guys and say, oh my goodness, there's a new star that comes around every so often and hits the earth. And, we don't know any of this. It's all speculation. But I really believe that that's just a story to let you know that sometimes when bad things happen, like droughts, deserts, and fires and hurricanes, well, yeah, the deities, the sun got reckless that day. It's just stories, okay? But it's also not just a story because it's going to tell you about cycles. And these things are, the God of vengeance is coming, right? There's a cycle for it. And that just means that night's coming and then the day will come. But it's a natural order of things. So when Daniel says, oh, I saw a lion come up with eagle's wings. Well, anybody who knows astrology knows that there's a lion called Leo. And the eagle is in the area down by Scorpio. This looks like the whole eastern half of the wheel. Well, normally we break the wheel up into night and day, above and below. But sometimes we break it up into east and west, as we found with Esau and Jacob. One got one side of the river, because the rivers always go north and south, and you get the east side of the river, or you get the west side of the river. And Jacob got the west side, Esau got the east side. Well, here we've got a bear that rises up on one side. And he was ferocious and says, get up and eat much flesh. But the bear is not one of the astrological constellations that is in the 12 houses. It's up above, surrounding the Polaris. It's one of the immortal ones, as well as the dragon. Remember, the dragon's eventually going to be thrown out of heaven. He won't accuse us day and night. How's that going to happen? Through rotation, cycles. Now, you got people talking about the draconians that rule the world. That's complete speculation. And if somebody had some transcendental meditation one day and decided that they're going to channel some demon and tell you that that's true, I mean, look, I don't trust any of these people, and I don't go by them. I don't believe that's how it works. But all this Galactic Federation garbage of Elena Danan and the rest of them, where they claim they are married to Thor or something, and they know Inky, and they spoke to the Draconian King or whatever, and they're a bunch of reptilians, and they look like serpents with little pointy eyes and weird little pointy ears, and no, it's all lies. That's demonic lies. But it's astrology that's reigning over us. When you say your sign is in Leo, you're not saying that there's a planet out there somewhere in the Leo direction that has a kingdom over this galaxy for a little while and then the Virgo takes over. No, it's energies and vibrations and cycles. So let's get that straight. But if you were to take it back 25,000 years, which is what, I think Christians today, when they got into this just a little bit, they discovered this, I think Aleister Crowley and a lot of these individuals talk about these precession of the equinoxes, and this happens every 2,000 years. And that would be like 12 of them would be 25,000 years, something like that. But that's not the cycle we're talking about. They don't understand these cycles. Just like Christians are day for year, they have no idea why they're doing this. Because 360 degrees of a circle is how many days in a year. And so, yes, 360 or 7 times, a day for a year, you're talking about 360. You're using the same system as the Hindus and their yugas. And because we know nothing about the ancient wisdom, it's not just their wisdom, it's the same stuff that we're basing our information on. David said his day unto the Lord is like 1,000 years, and a night like 1,000 years. That's 2,000 years. And that is not a yuga, which is a divine year of 360 years, but that's a much longer cycle and part of a Kali Yuga. All of these, if you understood it, you'd know that there is a plan of salvation that begins in our distant past and will continue into the future 1.5 trillion years, which is what they call nirvana. But we're not dealing with those cycles. They're much larger cycles. You could apply it to something like that, but that's so unknown we wouldn't know. And even the 25,000 years in the future, we don't know. We don't know what that's going to be about. We don't deal with that. We deal with the cycles that are more germane. And so the cycle that we're involved in, that we're trying to understand, that Daniel's explaining, is not 25,000 years, but only a 360 year divine year, where it comes down to when the sanctuary was defiled. And then at that point, he says there will be 7 times. Or what is that? A time is a divine year. 7 times 360 is 2,520. And so there's a lot that we're not going to go into it precisely and deeply. I don't think anybody knows yet how to calculate this perfectly, because for one, we don't know for sure the dates before Christ. There's been a lot of confusion about dating. So we're not going to be able to get it to its exact pinpoint. The best I can do for you on that is that Jesus said there'll be 2,000 years after he dies. And I can tell you that he probably died around 28. And therefore we know that this 2,000 year period will last until around the year 2028. But we don't know the day and the hour. But going back to Daniel, he sees a lion. Now, if he's looking at Leo, 24,000 years in the past, or maybe 12,000 years when, because of the precession of the equinoxes, Leo was coming up over the horizon, then it wouldn't make any sense. Because after Leo, which is one of the constellations in the zodiac, he then sees a bear. And the bear, if you're going to say that the lion is Leo, the bear's got to be Ursa Minor, or the bear constellation, and his tail is Polaris. And it doesn't come up out of the sea. Let me just show you Daniel chapter 7. We'll read the whole thing. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heavens throve upon the great sea. You see, this is not just the Mediterranean. This is the great sea, which is all the water at the bottom of the great mountain. But we don't understand that they saw the world that way, that all the land masses was a big mountain. And the beasts that come out of the sea are coming up over the horizon in the east and going down in the west. And it looks like they're coming up from the abyss, coming up out of the sea and going down into the abyss. But notice verse 3. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. But I just said that the polar stars don't ever go down below the horizon. They don't go into the sea. Well, they don't for thousands of years, because the pole star changes. It takes thousands of years. Now, none of those, whether it's the bear or Draco, they don't ever really go down over the horizon. But what they do say is the bear will eventually, at some point, bathe in the waves of the sea. So he may not go down too far. But one thing is, he's no longer the pole star, and therefore he's no longer reigning. He's thrown out of heaven. So heaven is the center. the polar region. And so Draco, even though he never really goes in our time, he won't go down over the horizon. Well, look at this, what it says here. In about 2800 BC, one of Draco's stars, Thuban, Alpha Draconis, was the pole star. At this position, Draco was seen as the center around which the heavens rotated. As such, many ancient peoples regarded the constellation as a symbol of eternity. However, because of the phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes, a slow change in the alignment of Earth's axis in respect to the stars, Thuban is now located about 30 degrees from the present pole star, Polaris. In addition, historical records suggest that Thuban was once significantly brighter than it is today, visible even in daytime. To the Sumerians, who lived in what is now Iraq from about 3500 BC to 2000 BC, Draco may have represented the she-monster Tiamat, the seven-headed dragon, who was defeated by the Sumerians' chief deity Marduk in a great battle in the sky. Marduk cut the monster into two pieces, one of which became Draco and the other Hydra, the water snake. The Egyptians pictured Draco as either a hippopotamus or a crocodile. I've told you guys about that before. The hippopotamus and the crocodile, then, are the two serpents. Well, the Egyptians called them a hippopotamus and a crocodile. And this is why even in the Old Testament it's called Leviathan or crocodile. But in our Bible, it's usually, it eventually became like two serpents with 6 wings each, which is the 12 houses. And they're around the throne of deity. In Greek, is the throne of the father is Cephas. And his son married Andromedas, and that, Perseus was his son. So this is all the same story of Jesus and his wife riding the beast. But in Egyptian, it's hippopotamus and a crocodile. In our Bible, it's 2 serpents, the seraphim. There are 2 seraphim, each with 6 wings, and they encircle the pole star. So what we're talking about here is the universe is one, ruled over by the Father. But if you cut it in half, you have Jesus and Satan. You have good and you have bad. You have light and darkness. So what we're talking about is this struggle between light and darkness and these archons that are going to reign, these astrological beasts. And ancient texts suggest that they also associated the stars with their goddess Isis. Some scholars have theorized that the Egyptians built a number of the great pyramids with openings that aligned with the constellation principal stars, but modern studies have not been able to prove this. Draco is connected with 2 stories in Greek mythology. The constellation symbolized by the dragon Ladon, who guarded the goddess Hera's golden apples. Remember why do you think we got this story that Eve ate an apple? Because it comes back to the Greeks. So Hera has golden apples in the garden of Hesperides. To complete one of his 12 labors through the 12 houses, Hercules killed Ladon in order to steal the apples. Hera honored her servant by granting him a place in the sky. Draco also is associated with the dragon slain by the mythical hero Cadmus. Cadmus planted the dragon's teeth, and an army of soldiers called the Sown Men sprouted from them. Some of the Sown Men then helped Cadmus build the city of Thebes on the site. Now, you see, people in Greece took the same story and applied it in their own day to Thebes. But we're not, when we read these stories, and Daniel or John, and they're applying it the same way, they're not applying the whole thing to Athens. Although Athens does figure in it. Daniel was likening this lion to the head of Babylon. He was going to start his story from Babylon because that was a cycle. The Hindu yugas start a new Kali Yuga in 3000 BC. And so if you were to go 360 years you would come out around, 2500 BC. And this is the beginning of cycles. These are the cycles that they're working with. So Babylon was the beginning of another cycle, but it wasn't a 2500 cycle. It was a 360-degree cycle, and this goes all the way down to when the daily sacrifice is defiled. And then he says there will be 7 times, and that's times the 360 divine year. So that is a 2,520 year cycle. We're not going to go in deep and point to exactly when this is all coming out, because as we said, we don't know the exact dates in the Old Testament anyway, although we could surely do our best to synchronize a lot of this in upcoming videos. But right now I want to get to the main idea here. Let's go back to what Daniel is saying with this in mind. First, before we do that, let me just read you this here in Wikipedia about the yuga cycle. A yuga cycle is a cycle age epoch in Hindu cosmology. Each cycle lasts for 4,320,000 years, or 12,000 divine years. A divine year is 360 years, so 12,000 360-year periods is 4,320,000 years. And repeats 4 yugas, world ages, and then it gives you these Hindu words. As a yuga cycle progresses through the 4 yugas, each yuga's length and humanity's general moral and physical state within each yuga decreases by 1/4. Kali Yuga, which lasts for 432,000 years, is believed to have started in 3100 BC. And that's about when Babylon was going on. And there was a cycle then that started then, and it's called a Kali Yuga. Near the end of the Kali Yuga, when virtues are at their worst, a cataclysm and a reestablishment of Dharma occur to usher in the next cycle of Krita Satya Yuga, prophesied to occur by Kalki. Now, that's a long ways out. There are many, many cycles, and many of them are so large, like Nirvana, which is 1 trillion years, that we don't think about them. But there is always a cataclysm of some kind at the end of these cycles, even the small ones. So the end of this cycle that began in 3102, that the Bible is talking about, is the 7 times, or 2,520 years. And so we're due to that particular cycle coming to an end at this time in our history. So Daniel says, he saw in the vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. So we tend to think that he's talking about the actual ocean, and there's 7 oceans and stuff. That's not how they saw any of this. This is astrology. And the 4 great beasts came up from the sea. Well, he's going to mention a bear that does, in long periods of time, it does take a little dip into the sea. He doesn't mention Tiamat here, because Tiamat's never going to be gone. It's going to have cycles, at the end of the 1,000 years, the dragon's going to be let loose out of his prison. Well, Polaris is now becoming the throne, the emperor's seat, according to the Chinese, and they called it the phoenix bird, and it's going to rise, and that's Jesus, and that's going to be the kingdom of heaven. Now, Polaris doesn't reach its zenith until, I think, 2100. So, Draco was reigning back in the days of Babylon, as we saw from about 3100 BC. Of course, we do have to add another month, an intercalary month, ever so often to catch up. These periods of time at the end of a cycle are usually like celebrations or some kind of reenactment of a cataclysm. With Christmas, it's this great big purge, and they have this orgy, and there is no laws, and everything goes into chaos again. And that's at the end of the year. So they recognize there would be this period of time when there would be just literally chaos for a period of time before the new cycle begins. But Draco has 7 heads. It is the power, it is the authority that gives power to the beast. It tells you that in Revelation. It's the dragon that gives power and authority unto the beast. But it's the side of the, remember there's 2 serpents, and it was split into 2, Draco and Hydra. So the side that's the dark side will eventually be thrown out from the throne, will not reign, and Polaris will reign. And that's the other side. That's the father Cephas' kingdom and Andromeda and Perseus. But there is these thousands of years where all this is going on, and those immortal pole stars are reigning over the other bestial kingdoms. Now, they're going to be tamed. The lion shall eat straw like the bull, and so forth. But Daniel's not just talking about kingdoms on earth when he's talking about the bear. He's talking about something that's reigning over the kingdoms of the earth. A cycle of time when the earth and the stars are being reigned over by a bear, and another cycle of time when it's being reigned over by a dragon. And we're waiting for the day which Christ will come and set up his kingdom, or the kingdom of Polaris, as we call it today. And so he says the first was like a lion. Well, maybe if this was a 5,000 year cycle, we're talking about the precession of the equinoxes and the sign of Leo. But this isn't exactly what he's talking about. At this point, he's talking about a very small age, a smaller age, really of only 360 years. He's only talking about going down to the age of Greece and then to Rome. So the first was like a lion. He is specifically talking about Leo, but not in a 24,000 year cycle, in a 360 degree cycle. And having eagle's wings, in the Bible, the cherubim have the face of a bull, the face of a lion, the face of an eagle, and the face of a man. The man is Aquarius. And so these are the 4 fixed constellations. You see, that right there proves that what Daniel's talking about in Revelation is astrology. Because if you go to Ezekiel, he sees these beasts with 4 heads and wings. And he gives you the lion and the man and the eagle and the bull. And there's no question he's talking about the fixed astrological signs. This is exactly what Daniel's talking about, astrology. And of course, in the book of Isaiah, he mentions the seraphim, which the word seraph is serpent. So there are 2 serpents with 6 wings. So we've got all this talked about by the prophets. And they're talking about astrology. Those 2 serpents around the Lord's throne. And then further down in the zodiac, you've got all these other animals. But the serpents rule over the other animals. They're the wisest of all the creatures that the Lord had made in the garden or the zodiac. And of course, this shows us there's one thing that is really interesting that probably nobody knows, but all these animals are ruled over by this dragon. However, they're supposed to be ruled over by the man, Adam, which in Greek is Cephas there. And their little orchard or garden of Hesperides. And not only is the serpent the wisest of all the animals that the Lord had made and therefore reigned over them, but the bear was considered an unusually strong and royal beast, because the bear is there up there by that's why it's called the polar bear. He's the polar star. And because the daytime sky is considered the northern sky, and Leo reigns at the top of the wheel, Leo also was a royal king of the beasts. Both Ezekiel, Daniel, and John are showing you signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. Astrological signs. That's what that means. And the wings, always there's 4 wings or something like of that nature. It's not talking about, you can go to astrological wheel and count the animals and count all their wings. Because it isn't, there's not one set description of an animal with 4 wings or something. Talking about the 4 wings of heaven in that case. And so it's talking about the entire astrological wheel. When it says it has the face of a man or the face of a bull or something, it's just saying that's the face that the one that's reigning. But there are 4 faces, and only one of them is reigning. So at the time that he's talking about this lion, he's saying that it's got the 4 wings, but it's the one that's reigning is the Leo. And it's not, like I said, 24,000 years ago, but it's a time when Babylon starts a new cycle with this regal lion. I actually believe that you could pinpoint the exact date for all of these things. But we'd have to understand this astrology a little better. Because if you had a clock and you just went by the hour hand, or all you had is the minute hand, not the hour hand, then you could tell what time during your age, but you wouldn't be able to know what age. So Leo goes around and around many times. If I said, you said, what time is it? 9 o'clock. Was it 9 a.m., 9 p.m.? Is it 9 yesterday, tomorrow? But then if you say, oh, let's get this more precise. It's 9:30, right? The little hand's in halfway in between. Okay, but that still doesn't help me. I need to know what day it is, too. Okay, let's get the calendar. There's 12 months in a year. So which month are we in? But you see, that's why the stars are the way they are. In the center around the Polaris, there are certain stars that go around much slower than the other stars in the zodiac. You could say then that you would need a little fine needle to find out where you're at in a zodiac sign. But then you'd also need to know whether you're in the bear or the dragon or Father Cephas's sign. This will give you the age that you're living in. And we don't understand this today. But if we understood it, it would be that simple. We would be able to get the hour, the minute, the day, right down to the second. So we're understanding this as astrology. We're saying that it's not really Babylon that is the lion. It is a power or a force. His wings were plucked off and he became a man. The cycle began on earth with Babylon, and he's depicted as the lion. And it says, I beheld till the wings were thereof plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And it's very clear in Daniel that he became like a beast, which is the story of Nimrod. Had this hairy garment, was eventually given to Esau, who had this hairy body like a beast. And that was his coat of arms as the mighty hunter. So Nimrod reigned over Babylon. And this is where it began. You remember that the first guy that got this hairiness all over him was Cain. The rabbis say his curse was that he was hairy. Well, that's the beast man. That's the mark that was put upon Cain, the mark of the beast. So Cain wasn't murdered or thrown into the abyss, but he was given 7 times. This is the 7 times that we're talking about, in order to be restored through the woman who would produce the seed. This is talking about the lion who, in his royal dignity, starts this reign, begins to descend down towards Libra, which is judgment, and falls and has to go through these 7 times through the wheel. So he will be redeemed and he will be reinstated as king. Read Daniel chapter 2, my friends, and then Daniel chapter 4. And 5, and behold, another beast second like to a bear. It raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth. Well, it does have 3 something, but the word rib there could be translated as side, 3 sides, like Eve was made from Adam's rib. It's not from his rib. It has nothing to do with the rib. It is talking about a side. So here we have the bear rising up on one side. Then there are another 3 sides, which is above him, directly across from him, and below him. So the bear is up on one side. And that's what happens when you look at the Little Dipper as it goes around Polaris. It rises up on one side. And that then can be determined a specific time of some particular cycle. But he's going to liken that particular time with the kingdoms that are on the earth. And it will manifest that way because as above, so below, there are many things that are going on around us all the time. And the astrologers and the seers knew this information. So when you saw a sign in the stars, it represented something that was going on earth. And so this ram with 2 horns, one being larger than the other, is not just Medio-Persia, but it's really Aries, the sign of the ram. And that is a sign that is some distance from the sign of Leo. So if it were, each of these signs were 2,000 years, we would be talking about thousands of years apart from Leo to Aries. So he's not talking about thousands of years because there's only like a few years later after Babylon that Medo-Persia took over. So this is a much smaller cycle. And they said unto it, rise, devour much flesh. So we're going to go through a period of time on the earth, a certain cycle of time, where men are going to have great wars and fight. And you see this with Michael the Archangel fighting and Gabriel fighting in these wars as he's explaining it. And this is, and after this, I beheld, and lo, another, like unto a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. And the beast had also 4 heads. Now, this has been described with 4 leopard heads, as if there was some astrological sign that was a leopard with 4 heads, and there isn't. This is very symbolic. A leopard has spots, and the spots of that leopard are symbolizing all the stars. It's all the stars everywhere, not on one side like the bear, which is the dark side, right? But it says on the back of it, it had 4 wings. So it was all around a particular authority that had many stars, many kings, many nations are going to start rising. But it's going to have 4 heads. And that happened with Greece. They ended up with 4 generals that went into 4 different kingdoms that split up the entire world. But the leopard isn't any specific astrological sign in one of the 12 houses, nor is it one of the immortal deities that reign like Draco or Polaris or something of this sort, but it is the stars that reign and form into these heads on earth. The heads are on the earth, and the 4 always represents the fixed astrological signs. So it's going to have a balance, and it's going to take over the world, and it's the stars going to be reigning over what's about to happen here. And so these stars are about to reign over the beasts that are coming later. Each of these are beasts. Okay, even the ones that are there clear up in the top are dragons and bears. The ones in the astrological wheel are other animals and men and different things and harps. Right? There's lots of different little things that's up there. Dogs. But then we've got this other beast, which is the starry sky, all of it together that's reigning over them. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. So it stamps the residue, what's remaining. Remember, the bear already got up and ate much flesh. This one's coming along now after it, and it's going to destroy what remains. But as you'll notice, in the reign of the bear, he was on one side, and Medo-Persia and Babylon was on the eastern side of the river. Rome was more in the west, and there became this division of east and west. And as it was then given to the 10 horns on this ferocious Roman beast, it began to even devour the rest of mankind. So as we see in history, the eastern areas of Iraq and all the way to Japan and China, that was all conquered by Babylon, Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great. But after Rome became the world power and down through the Dark Ages, and then when Spain and England and Germany and these countries would come, Portugal, and they began to colonize America, we see this rise up and eat much flesh all over again, but this time in the West. The bear, or Medo-Persia, is going to eat up much flesh. But it was on one side. Now the other side, the West, is going to take the residue, or the rest of the world. And the rest of the world was going to be dominated. And it would have iron teeth, and it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the rest of the world with its feet. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Now, just like we saw with the lion being actually Leo in the sky, and a certain power or regalness about it, because it reigns high in the sky, we also see that this bear is ferocious and powerful and eats much flesh, which characterize, and on one side, characterize that age of darkness that was about to come over the world. And now we've got another beast that's on the other side that gets the rest of the world. But it's characterized with 10 horns, and this is also dual, because in astrology, there is something to do with 7 heads and 10 horns. As we've seen, the dragon had 7 heads, and it's going to give its power and authority into the beast, but not just to the ferocious beast with 10 horns, but all these beasts, the lion, the leopard, the lion, all of them, the stars, the immortal beings in the center, and all the astrological animals around the end, the whole zoo. All of this is going to be reigned over by the center, which is at that time going to be the dragon. But at some point, the dragon is going to be thrown out of heaven. There's going to come a point when Polaris will gain ascendancy. He's been rising for the last 2,000 years, but he doesn't get its zenith until around 2100. But it also is going to be characterized by literal manifestations. There will be literally 10 kings. At least we're going to divide it up in that manner. There have been on Rome, after about 400, we have the Goths. These are the 10 Germanic kingdoms, the Lombards, the Herlu, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and on and on. I don't remember all the 10 different kings that reign, which are the Germanic kings. And they ended up being Europe and all this whole world that's been reigning since Rome. And they come up, and then there's a little horn in the very end of time, which is continuing to be broadened and focused in on, and it comes down to this last 1,260 days, which is this time of tribulation that Jesus says we're going to have a short period of time of a great tribulation. So, just like the other animals are both heavenly astrological signs and then actual earthly kingdoms, so the little horn may represent some specific anti-evil wickedness that will rise up in our lifetime as the Antichrist. Because it goes on and it says, I considered the horns and beheld there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. Now, we can see that there is a literalness to this in the sense that we're going to have to say these are symbolic horns of kings on the earth. And so the little horn is going to be then, in the final part of the days, a king who shall reign for exactly 1,260 days. And that particular king will wear out the saints of the Most High, and there will be a great tribulation. Well, I'm not going to read the rest of it all the way through, but just real quickly, we're going to say that if you go on here, you'll find that there's more to come. We've gone through a bear, well, a lion, a bear, a leopard. We've talked about eagle's wings. We've talked about the dragon, which is going to be accentuated in the book of Revelation. But then here in Daniel, it goes on to talk about a he-goat that comes against the ram, and it's split into 4. Now that he-goat in astrological, in the astrological sense, is the Capricorn, and the ram is Aries. But in the earthly sense, as we understand them here on earth in this cycle, we're going to see Greece then take over, and after Greece, then we're going to have this ferocious beast, which is Rome. But we are way, way over an hour, and I've got to stop here. But there's so much more I want to get into. We want to take this to a place where we understand this perfectly. This is all about astrology. We've already said that. But what we're not talking about here is why 7 heads, why 12 houses, or why 10 horns, 10 kings. Because the 10 kings are actually in astrology. So you have 12 houses, but reigning over them are the 7 planets. And they're not even the planets that we, modern science says that the sun's not a planet, the moon's not a planet. Well, that's not what they said in the ancient times. There were 7, the sun and the moon, and then you had Mercury and Venus and Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 7 planets or 7 planes. Well, that means there's a mommy and a daddy, the sun and the moon, and 5 children. Those 5 kids have 5 wives. So that's 10 kings. And then mom and dad. So that's 10 plus the 2, which is the 12. So that's why there's this little, Rubik's Cube kind of game anagram in Revelation. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is yet to come, and the beast it was, but is not, it shall be the 8th, and it'll come up out of the bottomless pit. This is the Rubik's Cube. He who hath wisdom, let him count. This is one of the most complex and difficult to interpret places of the Bible. We're going to talk about the 10 horns and what they really mean when we were talking about the sexagesimal system, a system of 10s and 60s. So we're in the decimal system, or the 10 commandments now. We don't have the rest of it. So the 10 horns that are going to hate the harlot, remember the harlot rides this beast with 7 heads. Tiamat is a woman. She ends up having these 10 children that are like kings. They're called kings from the general in Tiamat's army, which was Kingu. So that's where we get the word king. And those are the 10 kings that are coming to try and defeat the system of the new covenant, the holy woman. And we're going to stop there. I'm going to get this loaded. Hope you guys have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you all, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.